Hey, what's going on, roleplayers? It's the Bard here, and welcome back to the corner. Sorry I missed you guys last week, but it's been a rough fortnight. So I've been asked not all that long ago if I've done any work on clerics, but in a cruel twist of irony, our main cleric player is actually recovering in hospital right now. As it is, this cleric analysis is going to be dedicated to her. We hope you're back playing with us soon, and as they say, laughter is the best medicine. And with that being said, it's you who should be healing us, not the other way around. So there's not too much I have to actually go over for your baseline cleric, which is good because there's like 10 of these things we've got to get through. But there are a few basics that I want to cover before we move on to the first half of the variations. I don't need to go over spell casting because you guys know how to cast your spells already. Clerics are ritual casters as well, so again, everyone knows how ritual casting works by now. If not, I've done a video on it already. So Turn Undead now comes under your channel divinity, which is something I really like because it feels like your channel divinity is something that's not going to be wasted. Back in the day, you may remember if you played Day 3.5, they introduced divine feats which went off your Turn Undead ability, so you could actually do other things with it rather than just sitting there being practically useless. So now you actually get to use your channel divinity for other things as well. You get one use of this per rest at level 1, and then you get 2 of it per rest at level 6, and then you have to wait till level 18 to get 3 uses per rest. However, you can refresh this after every short or long rest, so you do potentially get a lot more uses of it throughout the day. So Turn Undead is your discount crowd controller for specific creatures. Wisdom save or have to flee from you for a minute. It's not bad, but it's only one of those things that's going to be used very, very rarely. If you have a specific campaign where you're concentrating almost solely on undead, then it's an absolute godsend, if you'll excuse the pun. But you're not going to be using it all the time, which is why it's so good to have the other variations from the domains. Once this thing upgrades to destroy undead, again, I personally feel you're not going to use it that much. At first level, things like skeletons, zombies, spectres, shadows, yeah, they're a bit of a problem. When you get to level 5, however, when the ability actually starts to become moderately useful, you practically just ignore them anyway, because they're barely worth your time. Something like a spectre, for instance, is challenge level 1, so you're going to have to be at least level 8 before you can destroy it. Again, it's not something that you're going to really want to use a channel divinity for when you've probably got a spell or the other members of your party have some kind of magical weapon which will do the job just as fast. Again, when you look at something like a wipe, for example, which is challenge level 3, you'd need to be level 14 in order to destroy that with a channel divinity. Is it really worth the hassle? I honestly don't think it is. I very rarely see you using this, if at all. Turn Undead's always been in a rough spot though. I would have thought it might be a little bit better if you didn't have to wait quite so long as you do to have your Destroy Undead be effective. Realistically, I mean, you're a cleric, you should be an undead specialist, which means you should be able to dispatch them a lot easier than, say, another character of equivalent level. Moving on then to Divine Intervention, and this is one of those abilities that is a point of contention for me, because it's not the kind of thing I would want to use, but that's just me personally. I would much rather overcome the challenge by myself. On the other hand, perhaps I shouldn't really think too much like that. You might have a character who veers slightly more towards evil and chaos, so perhaps asking for a divine intervention isn't really a big moral thing in their eyes, but at the same time it's weighing up the in-game abilities versus the out-of-game context. I mean, ultimately you get this at level 10, which means it's a 1 in 10 chance. But still, that's 1 in every 10 times when you use it, something is going to happen. Someone is going to do the work for you. And ultimately, there's the potential that it could break the game. One lucky roll is all it takes at an opportune moment where it could really destabilize a well thought out and well planned game. So I think it's one that really needs to be, I wouldn't say curtailed, but you do have to consider what are going to be the effects and what's going to be best for your gaming group. And are you going to destroy a very well crafted story if you use it too often? So it's one for moral debate, and I think it's one that I would like to discuss with people directly as opposed to just sit here and give my views on it, because it's one of those nebulous things. It's something that doesn't have a quantifiable mechanic added to it. You can make suggestions, and they give you suggestions that you should use something that is roughly an equivalent spell level, but still, it's something that could potentially break a game. You can attempt this every day until it succeeds, at which point, when it does succeed, you can't use it again for another week. Now, if I could get my deity to give me whatever I wanted at least once per week, well, I would be pretty well off. And I imagine that the player characters are as well. So what might be a good suggestion is, if your deity intervenes, it might be worth putting in some kind of thing where the GM says, okay, your deity has given you this. So they give you a vision, and you have this quest to do as part of your repayment for the deity's services, or something like that. Try to use it perhaps more as a mechanic to add more story, as opposed to using it to overcome certain parts of another story. If they're going to use it, I suggest there should be some cost attached to it. If a cleric is going to ask a god for help in some way, shape or form, then really it's only morally right for them to expect a little something in return. So how many of you guys are actually playing knowledge clerics? Because they're really quite good. As with all clerics, your domain spells are always available for you to cast, and knowledge gets some very, very good ones. Typical commands could be stop, drop, flee, whatever you like. However, you can get a bit creative with these. You could say something like dance, urinate, somersault. Now, potentially, somersault isn't really very harmful if they make a successful acrobatics roll, but if they fail it, you might get a bit of damage out of it as well. Depends how generous your DM is feeling. Realistically, you can't do things that are directly harmful, but there's usually a way around everything, so just be creative with this one. Don't underestimate its power. Identify, it does what it says on the tin, so just make sure you use it as a ritual, because you always have it prepared because it's a domain spell. Augury is not a spell for beginners. It puts a lot of pressure on your DM to come up with a very realistic idea of what's going to happen within the next 30 minutes of game. You're going to find that there are times in game when you plan very, very specifically, and it takes a long amount of in-game time to do that planning, depending on what it is you're going to do. At the end of that planning period, that would be the best time to use this, because then at least your DM has a fair understanding of the approach you're going to take towards any particular course of action. It's only really fair to allow them some kind of insight into what your party is doing before you go casting the spell. Suggestion is an improvement upon command. You can be more specific in what you want to suggest to the creature, but the 8-hour duration is really good for keeping that thing very, very far away from you. There's a very big difference between 1 round and 8 hours. Tell the creature to do something ridiculous, like keep walking away from you until the sun rises at midnight. Something that will never ever happen. At least that way you can get as much duration out of it as you can. Since there's no real rolls or anything you need to keep concentration in any way, unless you end up in another fight, then it's a pretty good suggestion that's going to make them go 8 hours in one direction while you're going 8 hours in the other. Non-detection represents a specific monetary investment. The standard 4-character party is going to require 100 gold pieces worth in order to get 8 hours of divination protection. It also means 4 of your spell slots per day as well, for an average party. So it's probably not worth the investment, unless you're going up against something very specific, like a powerful sorcerer, or someone who is very good at divination magic, like another knowledge cleric, for example. Speak with the Dead, again, does exactly what it says on the tin. The more information you can get, the better. You really don't care where the information comes from. Arcane Eye is okay, but I think without having any auditory abilities, the visual only is a little bit limiting, especially for a 4th level spell, and also for one that only lasts for an hour and you have to concentrate on it as well. It really isn't to my taste. I think it's much better if you have it as, say, like a Warlock invocation, because they get to use it over and over and over again. Confusion is too good a controlling spell to ignore, so make sure you're using it all the time when you're coming up against a group of enemies. Legend lore will tell you absolutely anything you want to know, but the cost is prohibitive. You need to put in 200 gold pieces worth to get the 4 ivory strips, and then you also have to spend another 250 gold pieces, which is consumed by the spell. So just use this sparingly. Why is divination so expensive? I understand that knowledge is power, so therefore it's a very powerful tool. But I hope you've got 1,000 gold pieces lying around for the crystal ball you're going to need for this spell. Blessings of Knowledge is absolutely great for your first level ability. 2 free languages, and then your choice of any 2 of Arcana, History, Nature, or Religion, and then you get double proficiency with those as well. Really good start. Knowledge of the Ages gives you 10 minutes of proficiency with any tool or any skill that you like. This is absolutely amazing because you will always be able to aid another with this ability. Make full use of this channel divinity and then spam that help action like there's no tomorrow. So as if it wasn't enough that you get to read a creature's thoughts with this particular channel divinity, you also get to cast suggestion for free as well. And because you already know the creature's state of mind, you can tailor your suggestion to get the best possible result. They also automatically fail their saving throw against the suggestion as well. I don't know who thought that up, but they are devious. Potent spellcasting. Extra damage on cantrips. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I think perhaps Visions of the Past is probably the only ability that's really not quite on par with the rest of the class, because it's a little bit late to be getting something like this. I think you can probably replicate this with a few other different spells, but other than that, it's not a terrible ability. And as for a divination ability, at least it's not costing you anything either. Life Domain Clerics are the plainest of plain Jane characters. Now don't misunderstand, I don't dislike the character, I dislike what it represents. Because whenever you have a cleric in the party, so often, and I have seen this every single time, they turn to the cleric, they look at them and say, "Can you heal me?" What I really like actually about 5th edition is that all the character classes, or at least the great majority of them, are so much more self-sufficient than they ever have been in the past. Everyone can do the short rest, hit dice expenditure. You've got classes like Rogue with their uncanny dodge, you've got Barbarians with their resistance to damage, you've got Fighters with their second wind. Lots and lots of characters have the ability to keep themselves healed. It doesn't actually make the Life Cleric redundant, but it does suggest that perhaps those clerics should be looking at preparing other spells instead of just concentrating solely on healing. The additional 1d4 points to both attack rolls and saving throws is useful in so many different situations. Considering the fact you only want to use as high a level spell slot as you need to cover all the people in your party, Bless represents a very good choice for most of your adventuring career. A Life Cleric's Cure Wounds is going to be more potent than any other clerics anyway, but ideally, I personally think you want to be concentrating on more defensive style spells, something like Shield of Faith. Take for example a poisoned arrow attack. Now, if you get hit by it, not only are you going to take the damage, but there's also going to be an additional effect as well. Cure Wounds can deal with the damage, but it's not going to do anything about the secondary effect. An armor spell would prevent all of that, both damage and poison. As well as the fact if you had multiple attackers and they all roll roughly just enough to hit your armor class, that could be 5 instances of damage, whereas an armor spell might actually prevent all of them. If you concentrate on preventing damage more than just curing it, at least you've got some variety in your gameplay. Ultimately then, when you do have to resort to some curing, at least you don't have to cure as much, and when you do use your cures, they'll be more powerful than everyone else's. Lesser Restoration makes blindness, deafness, paralysis, and poison all a moot point. It's a very good addition to the Life Cleric spell list. I'm not really quite sure why the Life Cleric gets Spiritual Weapon. The only thing that comes to mind is the best defense is a good offense. But that's the only thing I can really think of. But it's still a very, very powerful spell. Spiritual Weapon works really great. Considering there's no concentration on it, it lasts at least for a minute, and it's an extra use of your bonus action to get some additional damage. It's a very, very useful spell. Beacon of Hope is okay, the Wisdom saving advantage is good, the Death saving advantage is somewhat of a moot point because it's going to come up very, very rarely. And the Maximized Healing is actually okay as well, considering it's basically what Life Clerics do. If you use this spell and then start casting Cure spells, you're going to burn through spells really, really quickly, and everyone's just going to see you as the healer. Whereas if you cast Beacon of Hope, and encourage your players to help themselves, so for example a fighter's second wind ability, then they see you as more of a boon and less of a tool. If you can encourage your team to do their own self-preservation better, you get to save on spells for future engagements, and they get to feel like they've done all the work themselves. So, the Revivify spell. Have you ever been in one of those positions where someone says to you, "Why did you do X? Why didn't you do Y when I told you to? Had you listened to me in the first place, none of this would have happened." Yeah, basically that. Is 300 gold pieces worth of diamonds fair enough to be able to cheat death? Perhaps it is. But like I said before, if you'd done your job correctly in the first place, this probably wouldn't have been necessary. Death Ward, 8 hours of protection versus save or die, and basically you get Relentless Endurance as well. Not bad for a 4th level spell, but multiple castings can eat through your spell slots. Guardian of Faith feels like an odd spell to me. I see its best use as to be something to deal with certain attackers whilst you're trying to heal the rest of your party. I suppose potentially it could kill off some attackers that try to come in for a finishing blow, but if they're smart about it, they would just use ranged attacks instead. Still, not a bad spell for defending a static position. Mass Cure Wounds isn't a bad spell actually, because it's more efficient than multiple castings of just Cure Wounds on its own. Plus it's also a good candidate to combine with something like Beacon of Hope. And finally, Raise Dead. I will refer you to my previous comments on Revivify, and say nothing further on the subject. The first ability the Life Cleric gets is Heavy Armor Proficiency, because I would assume Battlefield Medic. Disciple of Life is getting you additional healing. At its lowest level, it's going to give you 3 additional hit points per cast. However, it's probably best used in conjunction with spells like Mass Cure Wounds, where everyone will get an additional 7, because you get 2 plus the spell's level in additional hit points whenever you cast the spell. Preserve Life is a pretty good channel divinity. The problem with it, however, it only works if a creature is under half health, so it can bring it up to half of the creature's maximum total, and no further. Still, if you have the option to use this, or spells, it's better to use this for healing. Try to save your spells for other things instead. Blessed Heal is okay at low levels when you don't have a lot of hit points or a lot of spell slots. However, as you use higher level spell slots for your cure spells, Blessed Healer actually provides diminishing returns. Eventually it's going to get to the point where you're casting spells like Mass Cure Wounds, and you might as well just choose to be one of the 6 creatures you can target with that spell. Divine Strike seems unnecessary to me for a single class Cleric. It's one of those abilities that comes a little bit too late in the game for me. By this point you already have access to 4th level spells, many of which deal far more damage to a creature than a simple melee weapon strike with some bonuses added on. I really can't see you using this much. I would assume people would be more likely to use it if they were some kind of fighter and cleric multiclass, which would essentially give you some kind of pseudo-paladin. So for your big level 17 ability, Supreme Healing gives you maximized healing, which is just another healing ability. Worst of all, you are essentially getting the same thing out of a 3rd level spell. You can do that with Beacon of Hope. For low levels you're not going to have access to this, and for high levels when you get to spells like Heal and Mass Heal, they do fixed healing rates anyway, so it's only really useful for spells like Cure Wounds, Healing Words, and the massed versions of them as well. That's really not an amazing option considering you have such a narrow focus of spells that you can actually use your abilities with. So next up is the Light Domain, and I feel that there isn't enough in it to make it really playable. Now I see almost no point in going over the spells for the Light Domain. We've got Guardian of Faith, which we've already done, we've had Scrying, which we've already had, and this class gets Burning Hands, Flaming Sphere, Scorching Ray, Fireball, Wall of Fire, and Flame Strike. Most of these spells are just another way of dealing damage to a number of creatures in a particular area. There are a couple of really good spells in the spell list, however, and Fairy Fire is definitely one of them. When you've got a single spell that creates light, offers advantage, and prevents invisibility, you really know you have a keeper. This spell really wants to be used as often as you can. It's one of the best spells you can get your hands on, and it's definitely worth using all the time, even on higher level encounters when other spells might be of more value. The rest of your party is going to be much more grateful for that advantage on attack rolls, especially if you have a very melee heavy combat group with lots of fighters and barbarians in it as well. The light provided by the daylight spell is good enough, but its real use is to get rid of those darkness spells. For example, when you've got things like warlocks with darkness devil sight, darkness becomes a very, very powerful tool. As well as dispelling the darkness, daylight lasts for an hour duration without any concentration, so it's great for dungeoneering as well. Light is a freebie cantrip that you get, so make sure you take full advantage of it. Since you're getting it for free, you might as well use it. Remember that your light can be any colour you like, and you can put it on almost anything you like. A soft green light within a mist could give the illusion of a poisoned cloud, whereas a soft blue light on a sword might give the impression that it's a magic item. Warding Flare isn't amazing in my opinion. By using your reaction to put disadvantage onto an attack roll, there's usually much better things you can be doing with your reaction. It does get a little bit better at level 6 when you can use your reaction to protect other people other than yourself, but still, it's not amazing. If you've got no other use for your reaction, then it's a fine choice. Other than that, however, if there are other choices for your reactions, then you definitely should be using it for those other choices. So your channel divinity is actually a good one. However, it does make some of your other skills redundant. So by using your Radiance of the Dawn, all magical darkness within 30 feet of you is automatically dispelled. This means you have no use for your daylight spell either. On the plus side, however, you do get the benefit of being able to deal additional damage to the creatures that are around you. It's a solid choice in many combat situations. I'm just disappointed that there was only 2 good spells really worth talking about on the light domain spell list, and one of them has just been made completely and utterly useless by this ability. The light domain gets potent spellcasting again, so having extra damage on your cantrips is just fine. Again, there's nothing really more that I can say about it other than it's there, you might as well use it. Corona of Light gives you an aura of sunlight, not just magical light, so it's going to be useful against things like vampires or drow, things that usually recoil from the sunlight. Creatures also have disadvantage against saving throws that deal either fire or radiant damage, which just so happens to be the great majority of the spells on your light domain list. One of the main benefits of Corona of Light is there doesn't seem to be any restrictions on how many times you can use it. It just says that it ends after a minute. So there seems to be no reason that you can't just refresh this 1 minute later and continue to give enemies disadvantage on your fire and radiant base damage spells. Thanks guys for watching this first part of the Cleric analysis. We've gone over the first 3 of the clerical domains. There's 11 of these things to get through, so this is probably going to be a 3-part video, and I will most likely round it out with an unconventional cleric video as well. So what I'm going to try to do, hopefully, if I can, and there's no promises, but I will try to go for a double upload this week and next week, because I don't really want to wait 5 weeks to get onto a new topic. Thanks for your support though guys, for what has essentially been a very trying few months for me. It hasn't been easy, obviously, with my friend being in hospital, so hopefully she's going to be on the mend soon. She has had some quite serious operations to deal with. And it's also been really difficult to actually find time to do anything, what with the card project also being in full swing as well. For my regulars who are interested, we hit our target within 6 days of the project going live on Kickstarter. We were actually really close to doubling the amount that we actually asked for, so we are doing really well. For those of you guys who are looking for a quick and easy adventure building tool, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below. Storytelling made easy, my friends. Thanks again guys for watching this Cleric analysis. Hopefully we'll get the other one up sometime this week as well. Thank you for all your support through what has been a very trying time. A bard couldn't ask for a better audience. And with all that being said, I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.